granddaughter needed a dog. She was in 8th grade, so she had her for 5 years, and then now yeah.
Funny how that works.
Well, I'm getting a give back. My granddaughter is selling me her old car cheap.
Because you hit the gear with your other
Yeah.
one.
So she had a Honda Element that she drove out here this summer, and when she got back to Portland, the red light went on, and she took it in, and it said they wanted money for a new head gasket. And so she got mad and called her credit union and got a big loan and bought a Jeep for 25. She makes more money than I do, so she's driving trucks. My dainty little granddaughter. Anyway, DJ, I think we can start.
We all started.
Oh, we are? Well, come on and join us, Pam and Coley and anybody else. So, and anybody else that's out there in video land can join us too. We're live streaming this at the same time. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and then I think we've got a small crew here, so I think each of us should introduce ourselves and tell us a little bit about what your art is, if you are an artist or an art appreciator, if you're a ceramicist or a painter or a writer or a musician or whatever. So Joan's exhibit is up here. It's been up for a month. It has 3 or 4 more days?
Yep, through Saturday.
Through Saturday. So, and there are still a couple pieces without red dots on them. Not very damn many, but there are a couple. So, and so we wanted a book to read this month that featured a woman artist. And I don't know who suggested it. Do you remember? What's
yeah,
her?
Tamara, my neighbor Tamara.
Your neighbor Tamara
suggested I read it, so
yeah.
I did. And she reads it every year as sort of an inspiration, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and the book is Forest Lover, and it's about Emily Carr, the British Columbian artist. Did any of you know Emily Carr other than that, or have you read that book? You do.
I never read the book. I tried to buy it here, but it wasn't here.
Oh.
But I brought some Emily Carr books here, if anybody wants to see.
Did anybody get a chance to, Stanlin forwarded me that 15-minute video. Did anybody watch that?
The YouTube slideshow.
Yeah, the
yes,
YouTube.
Yes, it's very good.
Isn't it?
Yeah, very good.
Oh, there's another video of just her paintings. Yeah.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, and I think that's what she's talking about.
Okay.
And I watched I fast forwarded through all of them.
I haven't watched it yet, but I was interested in it.
Yeah. So, anyway, so I'm Rich Schneider, and I work up here in the library, and I can't draw a straight line, but I try to write. And I used to sing for a while. And then I got those grandkids, and that stopped my singing. But at any rate, I still sing in the show. And I work here. And they've hired me an assistant, Coley, because they're afraid I'm going to drop a keel over one day, you know? And nobody's going to know what's on my desk.
That's
so,
a lot of pressure.
But I have no intention.
How are you feeling?
What?
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good.
There you go.
That's good.
So anyway, that's my story, and actually, the admission. I think I did tell Joan, but I'm actually trying to write a story of my journey right now. So, go ahead.
I'm Robin, and new to the area, and I'm really interested in a lot of different things, outdoor things, and art, and all sorts of things. So I'm new to coming over here, and I'm taking a ceramics class after this, beginning with ceramics. And I have some art education background and worked as an elementary teacher for many years, and am currently trying to get some painting going again, and it's been on back burner a lot with things that are driving forces, you know, and so in my travels I was doing a lot of photography and just kind of gleaning and taking in information, and so now I'm sort of applying that to some projects, and I'm putting my education experience with my art experience and writing and illustrating some children series books. So that's it for me.
So I'm Michael, and I'm also new to the area, and I absolutely love art, and I love all the different things that are offered here at the Josephy Center. It is wonderful that I can just come down here. Takes me 10-15 minutes to get here, and oh my gosh, look at all the things I learned. So yeah, about it. And I paint a little. Well,
You paint a little what?
yeah, a little. Yeah, a little. What is this question there? Yeah, it's just. I kind of call it. Yes, thank you. Very abstract, but it's fun, you know.
According to Emily, it's all about the feel.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you run a boarding house too?
Do I run a boarding house?
Emily ran a boarding house when she couldn't sell her art.
Oh, no, I own a company that's doing quite well, thank goodness. Yeah, so no, it's not a boarding house, no. But I do take in, I work for the Humane Society, so I suppose I'm taking in all stray animals. You know, I could eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
She raised dogs too, so.
Yeah, I did raise dogs a while back and had 2 dogs and a cat. So I'm almost there maybe.
There you go.
By some people's standards, I suppose.
Okay, Coley.
All right, I'm Coley. I'm an artist as well as working here. I do jewelry and metalsmithing. I have a hard time selling my work, so I'm thinking of starting a boarding house too. There's a spider
I
hanging
know,
out.
I've been watching it.
He's joining. Or she, it's Charlotte.
Sebastian.
I'm Sebastian. I've been here quite a while. I do a lot of this and that. I've been a lot of different things. I think that I'm right now sort of navigating very, very slowly the process of starting to sell my paintings. And that has been something. My art mostly. I think my art's maybe a little more introspective than I would have it be, but I think it's mostly about relationships with bodies.
Sounds very interesting. I like to see it.
But at the beginning of this journey, Sebastian also does drama and music. Yeah. And so,
And he's an intern here, isn't he?
pardon?
Isn't
Yes,
he
I
working-
also-
he's
I
And he's
working-
interning here.
And isn't he also trying to get the print group going again?
Exactly. The printmaking group.
There's all kinds of
So
things
if you
going
guys
on.
are
I don't
interested in
know.
print,
Yeah.
hey Sebastian, take names.
I'm very interested.
Okay, you got people who want to do prints. So yeah.
Sure.
There's a meeting tomorrow.
Or even simultaneously.
Yeah,
Oh,
meeting
there's a
tomorrow
meeting.
night at 5.
Meeting tomorrow night at 5 here.
All right.
Thank you.
There you go.
Perfect timing.
One participant.
All right.
So,
Heidi.
I'm Heidi Muller. I'm known in the community as a musician. I'm a songwriter. I teach dulcimer and guitar. And I'm also something of a printmaker. I'm kind of a off again, on again printmaker. And I used to go up to Victoria to play music, and I found out about Emily Carr up there.
Oh.
And then I took a trip, might have been 2018, 2019. I went up for a couple of days. I went to the Emily Carr House. The Art Council of Victoria had a whole bunch of her paintings on display. And so I like Emily Carr, but I'm not real current. Like, it's been a long time since I read a book about her, you know, in terms of the details of her life. I know she used to, she had a monkey, and she would roll it down the street in a stroller, right? She was a bit eccentric. And I also know that there's been a recent controversy over the last year, two years at the Art Council And some Native Americans have come in and said that Emily did them all a disservice, and they wanted them to display more other people's art and not just push Emily so much. And I don't know where that is right now, but I wasn't sure if you were aware of that.
I just heard a whisper about that, and I think that's an interest. I think that's one of the things we could talk
Yeah.
about is the problem of appropriation of Indian artifacts and art.
Yeah.
Art. I mean, we just had somebody donate a painting here, which is very much in the mode of an Indian painting, but it's not done by an Indian artist. You know, what do you do with that?
Yeah. So I do have a book of her art. If anybody isn't super familiar and wants to make at it, and a book she wrote called Kleewick, which talks about her time as a teenager, especially when she would get somebody to take her to the tribal villages that were abandoned, and then she would sketch and paint the totem poles and the various things. And I don't remember much about this book. I can't remember if I read it or got halfway through and put it down. Emily Carras, I knew her. And there's others. You know, these are just things I picked up along the way that is interesting.
Thank you, Heidi. That's very cool. So when did you start doing music?
When I was 11, I started playing guitar, teaching myself guitar.
You've basically made your way in the world as a musician, right?
Yeah, but I had other jobs.
Yeah, you have.
Well, you know, you go broke.
Yeah.
And then you work for somebody else, then you don't like working for them, and you have voices that tell you, oh, you could really do this. And so you quit the job and go do music, and then you go broke, and then you get another job. And I think that's the case with many, many musicians. And artists.
So it's the cyclical thing, huh?
Absolutely.
It isn't a linear journey, it's a...
No, it's like Wally. It's up, you see one, and then you're down. And then you're up, and then you're down.
That's a good analogy.
Okay, Joan.
Joan Gilbert, and I live in Enterprise, and I've been a graphic designer and illustrator for 30 years. And then 3 years ago, I decided to, even though it's still in the realm of art, I decided to kind of make a leap of faith and try my hand at fine art. So I got Josephy Center on board and decided by the time I turned 55, which was 3 years, I gave myself 3 years, my gimmick was to come up with 55 pieces of artwork by the time I turned 55. And so that was sort of to give me a push, and then accountability was through Josephy Center because I promised them I'd have something. So so I quit my job, and so I'm giving myself one more year of being jobless to see if I can make it, and then I'll go wash dishes for the hospital.
Did you take Wednesday sessions to learn the different mediums?
I took
excuse-
various workshops here and a couple in Meridian, and I just was on YouTube all the time. There's a lot of resources on that. So.
The Great University in the Sky.
Well, especially with the pandemic. I mean,
oh yeah.
I really didn't have any choice. I took a pastel workshop online with somebody. But other than that, really, that was my only choice, is to get on YouTube. But it worked, so yeah.
Did you learn from Steve on the carving?
Yeah, the carving, Steve was instrumental in that, guiding me. And then the bronze, I worked with Rod Ambrosen, and the pastel with a lady down in Meridian, and photography with Rick McEwen, and I'm sure I'm missing somebody, the felting with Janet Holman.
How about the bead making?
Oh, right, with Roger.
Ammerman.
Yeah. So yeah, I had a lot of help, but I learned a lot. So.
I think that's one thing is, well, first of all, let me go back and say that Mike Straw, and I had hoped Mike would be here, but Mike Straw was in looking at the art and just all by himself, and then we started talking and we were looking at the otters, and I said, well, Joan was worried that people just liked it because it was otters.
No, it's beautiful.
Because I had a people's choice sort of thing, so
Right.
that one won. And when people would say, "Oh, autumn's my totem animal" or something, and so I thought, was it they like it because it's otters, or do they like
That's
it
beautiful.
because it's the technique? So anyway.
Now the problem is Joan's going to have to kind of find her direction, and Mike looked at me and said, "Why?" I said, "Oh," and so I suddenly thought, and then having read Emily Carr, and you can tell us more about that, but Emily Carr seemed like she was just driven to capture first the totems and then the scenery, and she'd do anything to improve her capture of that particular element, including going to France for a year and studying with the French, learning how to use color, etc. So it seemed to me like there's kind of two different journeys. There's one that there's people who were just super focused, laser focused, and decide they're going to learn everything about, shape note singing or whatever it is, or the mandolin or whatever. And there are other people who just reach out and become kind of whatever you call it, and play 12 instruments or do different art forms or whatever. And it seems to me in a broad perspective, that's true. And I think also that what Joan's talking about is the need for others. And I know in the writing world, there are people who participate in writing groups, and so they'll have 4 or 5 people, and they'll come in and they'll critique each other, and that works for some people. There are other people who just hole up for, J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye guy. I don't think he just wrote by himself, and then had the occasional the mistress who told all. What was her name? Anyway, but the people who are more eclectic. And then if you're an artist, 1 or 2 trusted critics that what you're doing, and you can't pay attention to 12 different voices, but you can pay attention to 1 or 2. So I think that's another thing that kind of separates out. But I think the willingness to reach out to others is really important for most arts.
Well, as far as narrowing down things, and you might know if you've done children's book illustrations, but if you're represented by a publisher or something, they want one style that you do. They don't want to see all these different styles because they need to know that you didn't have a happy accident and happened to get this one piece right. And so I kind of came from that background, and then in researching, like if to get a gallery representation, it's from what I heard, it's kind of the same thing. They want to know what they're selling.
Yeah.
So if you're all over the map with every different style, then they don't know. 1, they don't know how to sell it, and 2, they're risking that you just were a one-hit wonder type person. Kind of where I was coming from is that in thinking about fine art, I would look at something, oh, I want to do that. Oh, I want to do that. Oh, and so I was all over the map. So this was to hopefully narrow it down for me. So yeah, there is something nice about playing every instrument.
Yeah.
But so.
Well, and Emily bounced back and forth between watercolor and oil, right? I think she continued.
Started in watercolor and
Pardon?
sketching. She started in
Yeah,
watercolor
her
and
early
sketching.
stuff, I don't know for sure, but it didn't look like the later stuff.
Right, yeah.
Her early stuff was watercolor, and then I
Probably
think when she
in there.
in France, she took up oils.
And she went to Europe 2 different times. She went before.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, early on.
Early on, yeah.
And then went back.
Yeah.
And then was inspired with the new way she approached it.
So, I don't remember a lot of the details of her path, but when she was invited to exhibit, was it in Toronto? It was the group of 7.
Yes.
And that was the first time that she felt really affirmed for what
Right.
she did, and that really made a difference for her when she got
Right.
back home. And it seems that her dark and moody pieces really came about more at that time. She didn't just do the totem poles, but she has these forest pictures that are really amazing.
Yeah.
The way she does the trees,
No.
lots of brown and green, but real stark, big stroke kind of stuff. And I don't know the Canadian artists that well, but that group of 7 was all Canadian, and I think they might have been all men.
They were.
There was something about her entry into that circle that was very important.
Well, that's a subplot in her whole life
Yeah.
as being a woman, and that's, I mean, one of her teachers in France, she said that was pretty good for a woman artist, and she just resented the hell out of that, and I think that's probably something that is more open to more of you now than it was 20 years ago. I think you could fit into that graphic artist niche, but if you were, I think even 20 or 30 years ago, that I don't know. There were women, I'm trying to think of locally, Eve Slinker but Eve Slinker had an inheritance, so she could afford to be an artist. That's another thing that Emily Carr had. That's a handy thing to have.
Right.
I realized that she was an extreme naturalist,
Yes.
and I found like not only was her struggle being a woman at that time, or maybe even being a woman at this time, and she was working, but a lot of people don't have that naturalist vision or experience, and all of the things that she did, it was just so far beyond their experience or knowledge or understanding. And so I think when they looked at her things without being out there to experience it like she did as a naturalist, it was foreign to them.
Yeah.
So
And you bring up another thing there, and Joan used a unifying thing in this exhibit was Wallowa Lake as a subject matter. And you can explain that, but you didn't. You wanted some focus,
Right, yeah. I did that on purpose because I know for me, given endless opportunity and just choices, I get frozen. And so if I limit it somehow, then I have to work harder to make it more interesting, and it actually frees me up. So that's.
So you focused on landscape.
Or the lake, or
First,
Raleigh. I could have
yeah.
done 55 by 55 on just the Wallowa Lake monster. So,
Yeah.
and that's probably my children's book.
Emily
Love.
kind of focused on one tree a lot. Like I feel like I remember seeing like a similar trunk all throughout her paintings, and I was like, oh, I bet she has like a few favorites that she goes back to, and you get that from being outside and from looking closely outside. And so what you said about being a naturalist, I think, you're a naturalist, you look closely at things, at nature, and you can really dive into the teeny tiny details, but then you also see, the tree and the whole forest, like she doesn't, like when she paints a tree, it doesn't look like it's just a tree, it looks like forest, like it's,
Who's a wonderful artist and started out, and he's from Eastern Oregon, and started out with realist painting.
Hyper-realist.
Yeah.
Very real.
But he was realist, like his guys on horses had caps on instead of cowboy hats. He wanted to portray what was really happening in Eastern Oregon. And he actually took his portfolio and went back east to visit Wyeth. And Wyeth told him to go home and start painting Oregon instead of painting New England. So he came back and painted. But anyway, he was hyper realistic, and all of a sudden, he just had to stop. And so, Eastern Oregon the Arts Council actually worked out a deal and sold shares in Don Greer for $1,000 a share. And they sold 20, so he had $20,000. This was 40 years ago. He had $20,000 to paint for a year, okay? And then at the end of it, he did a show at the college, and we all could use our $1,000 to buy some of this art. And that was maybe one of my, anyway, so I have some Don Gray art. But what was interesting, and then he taught a workshop. And, oh, I wish I'd have brought that painting. Actually, there's a painting somewhere in here of the watermelon
Eaters.
bar
You know, yeah.
in the restroom or somewhere.
Bathroom.
That was Eve Slinker's. What he did is say, take an object and paint it for 6 months.
Oh.
And he took it was big
Those
jugs,
yeah, those big.
and he painted them for 6 months. And every nuance, every piece of that, he painted it every kind of color and light and whatever. And then he broke the jug and painted the pieces, you know. But that, I mean, and now in his, you know, he's in his 70s, and he just took a trip to, look him up on Facebook. He's got a great page. And he and his wife went to France, and he's doing realistic paintings of France, painting doors in Paris, you know. But it's kind of interesting, that focus on technique, which was just, don't you think, in Don's case, was consuming to him.
Right. And he said that he had such a following that when he went to more abstract or expressionist, people were mad. I mean, just
Oh, I'm sure.
flamed at
Oh,
him.
I know
Yeah.
people here who were just pissed off. They had prints, because he made prints of horse paintings and some of this stuff, of Eastern Oregon paintings, and sold them very well. And he had a gallery in Portland and a gallery in New York showing his Western art. And then when he stopped, like Joan said, people were really mad. They were really mad. But I think it was technique which drove him. He just couldn't stand, like you said, being hyper realistic. Just finally, it was just like he said, I think he told me one time, I just painted myself into a corner. I couldn't get out of it, you know. The other thing is that focusing on external, like the natural world, as soon as you said that, it reminded me of Scott Momaday. And Scott Momaday is the Indian artist and writer, known as a writer. He's a hell of an artist too. And what Momaday is trying to do is portray the world of the Kiowa people in words and stories and mythology and image. And it's all focused on the Kiowa culture. So that's his focus. And one day he paints and one day he writes. And probably he's been doing more painting. I mean, he's old now than writing. But it was that he, you know, the driving force for him was the subject matter, and is the subject matter. What's your driving force, Coley?
Rocks and sticks.
Rocks and sticks.
Pretty much. There's a lot of different kinds of sticks and a lot of different kinds of rocks. I have it, I'll be busy forever.
Never run out of rocks and
Nope.
sticks.
I have a pile of sticks at my house.
Ooh. I'm always looking for more sticks.
Yeah.
So Heidi, how does this apply to music? Or does it?
Well, I have written a number of songs of place. I mean, that I'm drawn to describing landscape, places. You know, I use a lot of imagery in my songwriting, and I like that. But I also like writing stories. If there's a compelling story, I try to cook it down into a song. I mean, these stories, you know, you read a biography or something.
Yeah.
How to get it into less than 5 minutes. I've had songs that I did my best in 8 minutes, and then I edited some more and got it down to 6 and stopped because I didn't want to cut any more of the story out. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm always attracted to place. And then in the printmaking, I haven't done, that much of it. But when I look at what I want to do next, I like animals.
Oh.
And I don't know why. I mean, that's like one of my favorite things. I think I keep collecting pictures. And when I was looking at it a couple weeks ago, I thought, I can't just do animals. I need to find other things. Like, I did find that I did okay with faces, which was a real surprise to me, but I'm scared that the next face won't look like the person, So, but, and then the weird thing is, of course, I never thought I could draw.
Oh.
And so I didn't, even though I was attracted to doing prints, I didn't start them until, was it 2018, 2019. Yeah.
So you were afraid of the draftsmanship, of just the drawing part of it?
Well, I didn't think I could draw.
Okay.
So, and the big surprise for me is that, well, here's what I learned, is I can't draw, if you sit me down like in a class, and I must produce a drawing and a print within a couple of hours, my drawing probably won't look very good. But if you let me be home and take all the time I want, and I usually, like I did a bear with a red-winged blackbird on its head. And so I had all these pictures of bears to look at every detail. What do the ears look like? It just took me a long time. Then I had lots of pictures of red-winged blackbirds, same thing. And you give me a chance to erase and redraw, and then I come up with something I like. So in the end, I felt like I could draw. I'm just not one of those people who can sit down and whip something out.
Jeez.
And that became okay. That actually is a very comfortable place to be.
Well, that was my story as a child, and I briefly told it at the reception, but growing up, I had a couple friends that could just sit down and come up with a whole world, and I could never do that, and so I never considered at all going into art. I never took art in high school, but I loved to be home and mess around and stuff. And so I went to college, and I was a business major, and it was my parents who said, take an art class, and I'm like, why? They're just, take an art class, you need to take an art class. So I did, and it was a drawing class, and the first thing we did was he set up a still life, and we drew from the still life. And if I looked at something, I could draw it. And I realized, it's like, oh, I can do this, and then I realized, you learn about reference photos, you learn about all, it's like, oh, well, that's not cheating. I always thought that was cheating if you had to look at something. And so I never considered art until my parents forced me. So that's the joke, is usually the kid goes into art and the parents are like, no, go into business, where I was in business and my parents were like,
Well,
go into
especially
art.
if your dad's a physicist too.
Right,
It's
right,
like,
right.
go ahead and do
Yeah.
art. Although that rings an old bell, because I had a roommate once who was a fundamentalist Christian and a physics grad student, and I was drinking beer with another grad student one night, and he said, Ron's a good technician, but he'll never make a physicist. And I said, why is that? No imagination. So physicists have to have
Right,
imaginations
yeah.
too. That's probably why your folks imagined you being an artist.
Right, yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So I understand.
That's good stuff, Heidi. That's very good stuff. I think there are a lot of lessons.
You see that in the classroom too. When I taught kids, some kids have this feel and vision, and they don't have to refer to where are the bear's ears and how are his nostrils shaped and all of that. They just can create this image and composition where others struggle to put those pieces together with their thinking and feeling, and they have to sort of like hash it out. So and I imagine that you know they experience it that way as older people or artists or adults too. You know, just how your brain works. I think.
Well, in art school, we were supposed to keep a sketchbook, and I got a D on my sketchbook. And my teacher was like, "This is literally the worst sketchbook I have ever seen." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, you made me do this. Like, this isn't how I work." And so he's like, it's like, you know, you're for an idea, like you're supposed to kind of pitch it to the teacher before you make it. And I'm like, can I just start making it? Like, I just show me the hammers and the saws and the tools and like let me add it instead of like making me draw it first. I was like always so mad about that. And then, but I had to become disciplined and learn how to draw at least well enough so that the teacher could be like, yes, go ahead and make that, or no, don't make that. But yeah, so drawing is not, it doesn't come naturally.
My kids can just draw, just start at a point and then just work their way all down and have all of it, you know. Where I go and oval and composition in line and then build it more like a painter style. But they can just start on the corner and get this whole thing, you know. So I don't know how they do it, but it's interesting.
Well, Sebastian, you're closest to the educational process. So what lessons are there and what is expected of students and what students are told about pursuing art or music or any of the arts?
I think students typically learn much, especially students of music and art, typically learn much more from each other than they learn from their professors. Because I think that's mostly as a result of the subjects students choose. I think that focus on subjects is probably the one thing that you really have control over as a teacher of art. You can tell your students what they're painting or what they're drawing. But you know, even if you tell them they have to make a sketchbook of all of those different ideas, they have to approach the subject individually. You have to approach your subjects individually. And to me, that's always been sort of the most important thing. Is not so much technique, because the technique, no matter how rigorous it is, usually follows through from a really tense relationship between yourself and the subject.
But there is a place for learning technique, and some people are big advocates. I just read a review of a biography of Suzuki, the violin man. Suzuki believed that any child could learn anything. You just have to start out with, and he was struck with a certain piece of music, and so they had to learn to reproduce that. And then I think in visual arts, Gary Wishart, who was a very, very successful art teacher here, and we're going to do a show of his students this summer, but he required people to copy. That they, every day, they get in there and they had to copy some, you know, do a drawing, copying some piece of art or some, and render that. And it was all about learning, you know, just basic how to hold a pencil, I guess. But it's interesting. In writing, I had my favorite professor in philosophy in college said that he would often just get up in the morning and write like T.S. Eliot, or write like, and try to write in the mode of somebody else. Not to do that forever, but, and I can't tell you how many people, well, like Don Gray going to see Wyeth, you know, go home and paint Eastern Oregon, don't paint New England, but people get hooked on that, and they're able to use somebody else and use those as stepping stones, I think.
I was going to say, I remember reading about this artist and his student who had taken it on themselves to do a reproduction of a Monet.
Oh.
But they wanted to recreate it at the scale of the brush strokes. They wanted to recreate the medium that had been used in the style of techniques that had been used. And they found it just almost utterly impossible, but when they found sort of this magical combination of things, it was sort of I think that it's interesting to I mean all of that recreation and experimentation sort of comes from a place of studying very closely. Like we were talking about with just a few different trees, you know, I mean, even if it's a painting or a drawing that you're studying, it's still sort of this laser, this really close, tight look at what's in front of you. It's very contextual, you know, it's sort of contextualized there.
Back in the day of the masters and apprenticeships painting, I mean, that's kind of
Yes.
what they did. You just watched the master and
Yeah.
tried to recreate what they did.
And filled in a little bit, painted a corner of the painting or something.
Or if you go to the Louvre, I mean, people have their easels out and they're trying to recreate
Oh.
the paintings in the Louvre and other
Fun
museums.
fact, the copy of the Mona Lisa is there's a 50% chance that you're looking at a copy of it and
Yeah.
a very clever
Yeah.
forgery of that
Yeah.
one.
So there's a book called Steal Like an Artist. Came out some years ago. It's by Austin Kleon, who puts out a blog and creates art all the time. And he has a follow-up book called Keep Going. But it's the same idea that everybody steals from somebody. I mean, he calls it steals. A lot of people wouldn't think they're stealing, but
Right.
you're essentially building on the work of someone else. You're copying in some way, but you always end up, you know, you bring your own work to it. But it's a way to get started and it's a jumping off point. And so he encouraged that whole idea.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people are worried about that. You know, as a songwriter, I would worry that I was influenced too much by what I heard on the radio driving around, and then I would create a song that was too much like somebody else.
Mm.
There was this folk singer, Bill Staines, that I got to be friends with, and he died last year. And I got so worried that one of my songs sounded like his, and I sat down and played it for him, and he was not impacted at all. It's like he didn't really recognize that, and I thought I had done that, you know. And then there are times when I get stuck, and I think, well, maybe I should just write a Nancy Griffith song, or write a Lucinda Williams song, you know. When you can't figure out what to do, try to do something that you like, and it doesn't mean we aren't really going to succeed at being just like them, right?
Right.
But it sort of gets you going.
Yeah. Well, the old philosopher said, you know, you can't step into the same river twice. So as much as you try to reproduce anything, it's still you. It's doing it or whatever.
It almost highlights what you're looking for that's unique or different to do that, maybe.
I have a woodworker friend who said it's already all been done. That was his attitude. Like he was frustrated, like there's nothing new or avant-garde to create. And I looked at him. I thought, well, you know, you see all this stuff and you take all this in, and whatever you do will be, you know, a result of that. And so then that was the new piece where he just kind of got stuck on that. You know, there's no point because it's already been done, you know.
Well, and that, I think that trap, really, I mean, in music it's evident because there are some people that are, Nancy Griffin, you have people that are very successful and make a good living at it. And then you have the people that are like this, and that goes for, you know, there are people who kind of, who sell visual art for millions of dollars, you know, and there are other people who paint or who throw pots or do whatever, and they don't rise to that level. And rising to, that's a wrong metaphor, because sometimes, frankly, they might be just as good.
Mhm.
We all know about the undiscovered artists and the undiscovered writers and all that. But, you know, Emily Carr just goes and runs her boarding house for 4 or 5 years because nobody's paying attention to her, and then is discovered. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I know that with writers, it's really, I dealt with writers with Fish Trap for years and years and years, and there are any number of really outstanding writers out there, and some of them are better writers than the people that are on the New York Times bestseller list.
Mhm.
So what is it? Well, it's chance, it's a name. We all know Louis L'Amour. Okay, there was a writer in Walla Walla named, dang it, he wrote Potboiler Westerns, and he wrote a big book about the Snake River and a big book about Chief Joseph. Okay, but mostly he wrote Potboiler Westerns, and he asked me one time, what is it with this Louis L'Amour? He said, why is he making all this money and stuff? And he gets all these books published, and this fella, and I'll remember his name in a minute, had actually sold a couple of books to the movies, and John Wayne had been in Bend in the River. I think that was one of his titles. And so I was talking to a publisher friend, Mark Jaffe, about it, and he said, well, I'll tell you why. He said, Mark Jaffe said, first of all, he said, Louis L'Amour had a name. What better kind of name could you have than L'Amour to write Westerns, huh? And he said, and the second thing was Louis L'Amour wanted to be a millionaire. And I made him one. And I said, how was that? And he was president of Bantam Books at the time. And he said, Louis L'Amour came in and told me he wanted to be a millionaire. And I said, I'll make you a millionaire, Louis. I want 20 books in 10 years. And I'll give you $1 million. So he did it. And so he said, meanwhile, here's this guy in Walla Walla, and all he wants to do is be Louis L'Amour. So, but the point being that the role of chance and the fact that we have to accept who we are and where we are in the world.
I think it has to do with circumstance and a lot of things, but location and timing, and you know, because here we're not in New York or somewhere else where some of the really big money artists are functioning.
And you know, in that middle rung, there's Don Gray. I mean, his journey, it would be great to have him here telling about his journey, because he's very successful, and then when he decides he can't do that anymore, he goes broke. And then you know what he did? He painted billboards. For about, what was it, 2 or 3 years he painted billboards?
Murals and all
Yeah,
around
no, that was later. Billboards first.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
billboards first.
Like up high or like and
Like he painted big Coca-Cola bottles on billboards all over Eastern Oregon. And he did that for a year or two. And then he came out and he took, billboards are papered over paper over
Right.
paper. And he ripped those out and started making collages with that. And then he went to painting murals. But he's done this journey of all these different things. But he's made, I'm sure, over time, a handsome living at it, although there have been periods where he didn't make anything, and where he dropped down out of sight.
So, I have a question. I have the book Forest Lover on order from the library, and did you read it? I mean, you read it.
Yeah.
But you were a little skeptical about the book. Do you think there's enough value in it?
I think that it's a fictionalized account of her life, okay?
Yeah, why would somebody do that?
That's what they do.
That strikes me a little odd.
Historical.
That's what that woman does, and she's successful. She wrote that, what's the other one? Hyacinth Blue.
Right, yeah.
Who's the artist? Vermeer?
Oh, that's about an artist as well, huh?
Yeah.
That's a bit about the luncheon on the boating party, a memoir story.
Uh-huh.
There's a few.
So that was her niche. And you know, that's another way you can make a living. You could take your songwriting and go write jingles for Nike or something. And you know, there are people who do that.
But I must say, it was one of the frustrating things for me, because everything I read, it's like, did this really happen? And I end up like Googling pretty much everything in the book to see if it really
Oh, did you?
happened, because it was distracting, because I never really have liked historical fiction, but I've gotten into it when it's more just generic names, but with somebody specific, it really bothered me that this might not be really what happened, since they're using a real person. So
See, that would bother me too.
Yeah.
I like historical fiction, but if it's just a whole fictional story, it's set in a time,
Right.
set in
Yeah.
a time and place.
Like, just tell about World War
Yeah.
II or something
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah, so I would probably be doing the same thing.
Mhm.
And so if that's the case, then maybe, you know, like a book like this, you know, a woman writes about knowing her, right? Then you get maybe more real facts from that kind of a book.
I'm sure that's true.
But did any of you also read this book yet?
I was going to say that I haven't quite finished it, but I enjoyed the author's point of view from kind of writing like an artist would see things, and that kind of surprised me because I didn't really know a lot about the author, but I thought she's writing like describing like what Emily was seeing or feeling, you know, in her experience. So describing, you know, the scenery, the ocean, the water, the native people, the trees, the colors. Like there's one thing that says the Olive River, and I thought, well, that's what I would see, or that's what Emily would see. So I appreciated that, and then just kind of the hatched up time period, kind of where they were, the rustic sort of environment too. I don't know how you describe that in literary terms, but
Well, I think that, I mean, it's like her being a contemporary of Georgia O'Keeffe, her going to Paris, you learn something about art movements and stuff, and intense interest in color struck me, and everything is, all the descriptions are very florid in terms of the descriptions of color. So I think that part of it was interesting to me. And it was also interesting, the whole journey north. I figured that the love story was a little bit contrived. You know, the guy was just too good.
And that was
have you met? Yeah, you've met
Claude.
you're that far. Yeah. I thought he was.
Yeah,
a
I
little,
googled that.
You what?
I
Oh, you
googled that.
googled. What was the
And
answer?
it was made up.
It was, yeah. Well,
well,
I think that was
Oh,
pretty
sorry,
transparent.
spoiler alert.
yeah, well, for her, it's okay. I figured that, but for her to be a woman in that time period in that location,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
was definitely
it's more of a you know a man's environment, so for her to be that age too and not have had a relationship or marriage, I mean that's
Right,
probably
which
common
I think is
where
the point of why she wrote it that way.
Yeah.
So I am being a little bit.
Yeah, on the other hand, you know,
Critical.
the fact that here are these, how many sisters, and only one of them marries and has kids, and we don't hear about that, but the fact that that kind of thing was around, happened, is of interest, and how it was probably easier for a man to, my Uncle Ole never married, and he just was a logger who went here and there, and everybody said that's old crazy Ole, you know. And that was harder for a woman to do that, to live
Spinster life.
yeah, that's it. Women were called spinsters. That's right.
I had a question about the authenticity of the native culture and a lot of things that was brought up in her interaction with the tribes and the people
Yeah,
and that, because I'm not sure, like on the author's research, like how accurate a lot of that was. It's kind of like maybe she took a few things and kind of went with it, like the kind of the, what do you call it, the animism, where they worship the animals. Am I saying it right? Animism? anyway, that part, I didn't really know whether it was accurate or not, but it would be really important to me that it was accurate. Yeah.
I just remember she was in Vancouver. It was like when she was a teenager, and when she first started going out to take a boat, and they'd drop her off for a few days. She had some friends, some tribal friends.
Yeah.
And I had the feeling that, of course, she was like 15, but this idea that she was misappropriating something, I had a feeling she had a really good relationship with tribal members, and then maybe even in that time, maybe her peers would not have made friends with them. You know, she was just so much on her own little thing. It disturbed me when I found out there was this ripple up there in Victoria about them featuring her art now. And I'm thinking, if you look at her attitude when she went out and did it, I don't think she thought she was stealing anything, taking anybody's stories, misrepresenting anything. I think that what she painted out there is her best representation of what she saw. I wondered, do you have a feeling about that?
I think it's very complicated, but let's go to Edward Sheriff Curtis, the photographer of American Indians. And we have the whole set, by the way, upstairs, so if you want to just gorge yourself on photos, turn in the last century photos of American Indian tribes, do it. He was criticized because at that time, 1900 is the nadir for American Indians. Their population is down to, I think there were 236,000 Indians left in all of the United States in 1900. So they're at the bottom. And he actually is credited with the idea of the vanishing Indian. And so what he does when he tries to go around and and he does people, he's known for the photographs. He also did wax cylinders of 70 Indian languages. He wrote down, stories and myths and everything. He's a white man, right? And he was criticized for dressing Indians up and paying them to take their photos and not painting them as they really were in very bad straits. Well, just without going into great details, but the Makah Indians had to go to Edward Sheriff Curtis to find out what their canoes looked like because they didn't have any seagoing canoes left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? But he had captured them. And so he is a man of value. And I agree with you. In the Indian communities that I know, people are so generous, and there are people who get their hackles up and don't appropriate our art. And I do think that's wrong. You don't go out and ledger art, which is distinctly Indian art, and we've got examples up there. You don't go out. A white person doesn't go out and get some ledger paper and make stick horses on it and say they're doing Indian art. You don't do that. But I think there's room for white people, and there always has been, to interact with Indians. And that's one of the great joys of my life right now, is interacting with tribal people, and they're so frigging generous most of the time that I could just give you hundreds of examples, but Chuck Sams, who's Umatilla, is the head of our National Park Service now, and there's an interview this week in High Country News, and you could say, okay, the questioner kind of says, well, yeah, all these lands were stolen from Indians. And he said, yeah. He said, but he doesn't get angry about it. He says, we at the Park Service are now entering into co-management agreements with 90 different tribes, and I don't know. My mentor, Alvin Josephy, who was, 50 years ago, 60 years ago doing this, when it was probably, since Indians weren't being heard at all, and anybody that had listened would get a hearing, So it's more difficult now. and I wouldn't try to write I don't think you try to write or draw or anything like an Indian, but I think there's space to participate with Indians. It's just that it's a different space now than what is when Emily Carr did it. You know? Different space.
I kind of thought of what was in the news some time ago about the Native children that were in the
Boarding
missionaries and
schools.
schools and all of that, because kind of what was happening in the story where they were taking over the camps and villages and shipping people around and all the things with the kids. I thought it was kind of that time period, I believe, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. There's some
sad.
horrible things about our relationship with Native Americans in the past. And you just have to move beyond that. You have to move beyond it. And you have to say, I'm sorry. And you can't say things like, well, that wasn't me. That was my great-grandfather. That's bullshit. You just have to say everything that was done was wrong. But here's where we are now. As Chuck Sam says, here's the national parks now. And by the way, we're going to make national parks more friendly to Latinos, he says in the interview, to Latinos and African Americans and the LGBT community. National parks are for everybody. And the 10,000 acres out here, precious land, it's managed as a wildlife area, and you can go out and hunt on it. There's a not all Indians, not all Nez-Perce are all the time generous, but Coley and I just spent a weekend with her, a day with 20 Nez-Perce from Nez-Pelo, where Joseph band, and they were extremely generous, I would say. It just made you feel good to be with them. Yeah. Well, I thank you all very much, and it's a stimulating conversation for me, and I hope it was for some of you, and I look forward to seeing your pottery and to seeing more prints from Heidi and more jewelry and looking at Coley's sketchbook.
Sticks
Yeah.
Sticks around.
You can critique my sketchbook.
Do you have a booth at the holiday fair?
I do. I have.
Sure.
I do. I guess I can plug my at the bazaar at the Joseph Community Center on the day after Thanksgiving. Come buy some local stuff, and I'll have a booth there of my dad's artwork as well as my jewelry and things.
Nice.
I'm enjoying visiting all these places and doing these things. So I was wondering about the community center because I'm just down the block from there and I go by it, but I haven't really seen anything go on there yet, so I
Yeah.
didn't really know.
November 25th and 26th.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Good.
and then the next weekend after that.
December 2nd and 3rd?
Yeah.
And then
Cool.
There-
Yeah, friendly faces are nice.
Then, since you're new here, you might not know there's a holiday music show here on the Sunday before Christmas, so it'll be on the 18th.
Nice.
And
Here.
it's usually completely packed out with people, and it's local performers and of various ages, some seasoned people and some kids who are learning fiddle and stuff like that, but it's really nice.
And where is that?
Here.
Right here, Josephy Center.
Yeah, it's here.
I went to the symphony.
You did?
And that was nice.
Okay.
Enjoyed that. A couple weeks back.
Yeah. And Sebastian, I don't know what you're going to do next. I don't know. So you're gonna have to
Printmaking.
figure it out, huh?
Yeah, print.
Keep painting for now, I think.
Do what?
Painting.
All right.
Just keep at it.
All right. All right. Well, don't be afraid to ask Joan for help, okay?
Yeah, any question you have on the Lao Lake? Other subject matters?
Okay, there's still some coffee over there, and in honor of Emily Carr, we had a little smoked salmon left, so eat up that smoked salmon. crackers.
Is this the only, group meeting we're gonna have on the book? Or
Yeah.
is there, okay,
Yeah,
cause I just couldn't get it in time to,
I'm sorry, and I had a copy and
oh, you did, well, yeah,
Yeah.
but you were reading it.
no, I got, anyway.
Oh, okay.
I'll meet
Yeah.
with you later if you would like.
Hi.
I would meet with you
Well,
later
it's just a
if you want
thought,
to.
I mean, it's coming in, I'm sure, maybe tomorrow, so, yeah, I'll
I can
read
give
through
you-
it. Yeah,
my
I'm
contact.
interested in sort of getting back in touch with her. She was such an independent person, and I admired how she stuck to it, you know, through her life. And also because she was so strange in some ways, I can't imagine she had all that many friends. And the fact that she was just her own person,
Yeah.
you know?
So we didn't even talk about artist eccentricities. And then Coley's mentioned her father, who might have been the most eccentric artist in Eastern Oregon in his day. We once did a show when I had the book lot. We did an art show of his, and he filled up that skylight gallery with stuff that he had made out of baskets and berry catchers and duck and
Decoys.
duck decoys out of Thule and he actually did stuff for museums,
Yeah,
right?
he did, yeah. If you go to the High Desert Museum, half the stuff in the, what is it called, something of the West section, half the stuff was made by my dad. But he went to museums and did research and like he like saw the object in the museum and was like, okay, I'm gonna figure out how to make that. And sometimes he got help from indigenous people or like advice or consulted people, and sometimes he just figured stuff out himself, and sometimes he was a consultant for indigenous people.
One of my favorite stories about that is Mary Schlick wrote a book on Columbia Plateau basketry, and she was the wife in the 50s of a forester who was assigned to the Colville Reservation, and they spent their whole life, and then they went to Warm Springs and they raised their kids there, and she became an expert on baskets, and she became an expert basket maker. And I was talking to the expert basket maker at Umatilla, Joey Lavador, one time, and I said, when did you guys start using corn husks? Because, you know, and corn husks weren't here in the Northwest. He said, well, we started, I think, about, I think he said about 1790. And I said, 1790? There weren't any white people here then? He said, Mary Schlick took us to museums and dated things, and there were plateau baskets with corn husks in 1790. And then you started thinking, and I said, oh, well, maybe those corn husks were traded. And he said, yeah, my ancestors were were Métis, French Canadian Indian, you know. And so anyway, and then later, Mary Schlick found, just like you're talking about your dad, found a basket stitch that had been lost. And she figured out how to do it. And she gave that to her Indian basket maker friends, and she'd never do it herself again. That was her gift.
I know some basket weavers who know a lot of indigenous like methods and techniques, and she will never teach it to anyone except another indigenous person. She saves the knowledge for them, and they can share it as whatever they want to do with it. But she's like, this is yours. Like this is not for me to make money off of. This is for you. This is yours. But she has one of those brains that she can figure out, and she can just look at anything and just see it and do it. And so, yeah, people like that are really valuable, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
And it's important to have those skills and keep the knowledge of keep it going.
Yeah.
You have to go to it, so-
You have to go throw pots.
I'm a little,
Make
I'm
pots.
a little bit late for
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was
Thank
nice
you.
to be here.
That was neat, really neat.
So tomorrow night at 5, if you wanna.
Oh, we can
Oh,
share
tomorrow night,
information.
5
Okay.
o'clock, yeah.
It's,
I'll be here.
it's because COVID interrupted using the studio, everything's sort of fallen by the wayside, so people who are interested in printmaking are just getting back
It's
together
cold in
again
here.
to figure out what to do.
And then we can share information if you wanna contact me when you're ready to talk about the book, we can.
Oh, sure.
Try your great salmon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pardon?
I'm gonna try your great salmon.
It's pretty good.
Let's see, which door?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it.
Not sure. That one, okay. The right door and the right one. Sorry, I'm late.